A pleasure to meet all at last. And so, this is it. This is pretty much one of the last, if not the last video for 2025. So, I feel like that is tradition at this point, as I've done so many times over the years. But, we've come to at least an agreement here to have this be an annual tradition. Essentially a recap for every single year. Whether we have to talk about the highs or the lows, it doesn't really matter that much, because overall, there's plenty I will have to say for 2025. I mean, we started things off by, well, getting myself a new car, as well as doing some standard activities, including some traveling, some places I've never visited before, some places I've revisited, with a few notable examples being the likes of the Mitchell Park Domes, a place I hadn't been to in like 15 years. There, of course, was also a Harley Davidson museum. Both of these were, of course, in Milwaukee, but I feel like that's something that's an entirely different topic, worth of a different video. But the thing is that in the months taking place afterwards, a lot of business as usual would take place, with more GWK, the First Impressions, as well as the likes of Hot Wheels Hilarity and Honest J Nowak, but we'll get back to those in a moment. Of course, it's also worth noting that we have done some more outdoor adventures, especially when the winter started clearing up, and the winter itself in the first few months of 2025 wasn't exactly that bad. I feel like in terms of other personal things that happened in my life though, medical records of course was updated with some more blood work showing that my health is exceptional, even more so than the last one was. But the real twist that came around was that I got the shocking news that I hadn't had a tetanus shot in over 10 years. Yeah, and I'm just talking that while most tetanus shots can usually go for about 10 years before needing a fresh new one, I apparently hadn't had one since 2011. Yeah, so this means that 4 years I had little to no contact with the tetanus bacteria, and even more so, just the fact that I was not given an injection for 4 years. That was shocking news to me at the time. But then, of course, I didn't really have much contact with any pathogens in any case, other than most of the standards like common cold and flu, but that's another thing I'll circle back to later on in the video. But let's just say that while the business and my jobs outside of my work on YouTube or otherwise have been known to take place, there of course was the startup of a new series of mine that has somewhat become one of the biggest, most all-time viewed and watched series on my channel, T-Rex. Basically, it's the shortened abbreviation meaning Trainwrecks, although I feel like that's its own unique title. But the thing is, I simply called it T-Rex because shortening it or hypening it tends to be a cooler aspect that allows it to become more popular over time. A little bit of street cred, as you know, it goes a very long way. But let's just say that while it at first ignited a good amount of response, at the same time that I also was becoming popular over the years because of certain rail fanning, as well as Honest J Nowak episodes, and even GWK the First Impressions, which I started as far back as August of 2024 with the game Monster Jam Steel Showdown. Yeah. Steel Titans wasn't exactly a new game though. But here's the thing though. Life really started to turn around for me by May of 2025. Essentially, May 7th was a date unlike anything that I had ever encountered before. It's a date that I did not expect would actually turn around in a brutal, horrifying way. Basically, this is of course my left hand. Unlike a good amount of people, this one hand alone almost cost me my whole life. Yeah, so essentially, what happened was my left hand ended up getting caught in machinery and ended up getting sucked in, causing over 9 fractures to occur. 3 fingernails ended up getting completely ripped off as well, causing a near full bleed out. Yes, that's what happened. The result of this was a slight negligence that happened in the company I was working at the time, in which that there was apparently a safety system that was supposed to be put in, but apparently was removed for some reason. And they knew about the risks and were even told about this by fellow coworkers of mine. But yet, little to no change was brought up until that very date of May 7th, 2025 had come and gone, with some blood spilled on the floor, and of course, me having to be rushed to the hospital. This is of course where I would be examined and later put through some surgery, which lasted for about 6 hours. Ended up even having to be transferred to 2 other hospitals within the Milwaukee County. Yeah, so while the immediate hospital and intensive medical care center that I'm known for is right around here in Menominee Falls, just a mile and a half away from here into my house, they couldn't really work on my hand, let alone the kind of injuries that were sustained at the time. So they had to transfer me over to a hand repair specialist over in the Wauwatosa area, which took an incredible 20 minutes of driving. And just the fact that I had to be transferred to 2 different clinics is already crazy enough. Because think about it, a lot of stuff had happened during that time, and I'd slipped in and out of consciousness and even developed a slight delirium. But that's just the thing about blood loss. There's always that little chance that something else could go wrong, whether it be just a measly side effect of simply losing a good amount of blood or otherwise. Either way you look at it though, it wasn't until 10 o'clock, nearly 6 hours after the injury occurred, that I was finally released from hospital with a cast being worn. Basically, a large splint along with some wrappings being put in. And for the next month that would ensue, no joke, although first off, I would not be put into work for another 2 weeks. During that time, however, I actually visited the East Troy Electric Line, which is basically another railroad museum that I'd visited. Now, I had gone to several of them over the years, but East Troy has been one that I've been wanting to revisit for a long time. And well, nearly 20 years since the last time I went to East Troy, at the same time that I was already doing a lot of revisitation. Kind of a part 2 to 2024's revisitation lapse, which in and of itself is its own topic. I revisited the East Troy Railroad Museum for nearly 20 years of time had passed. And I will say, I had a pretty good time over there. I only spent about 45 minutes though, because eventually a new plan started to show up immediately with some lunchtime back in Menominee Falls, so that's essentially what I did. I stuck around until the trains were operating and basically left the museum. I eventually headed back, to which I would head out and have some lunch over at the Chocolate Factory. It's a pretty nice franchise that we have in Wisconsin, and I'm sure that other states are eventually gonna have this well-known franchise with sandwiches and ice cream and all that all put together. There's plenty of other locations that the Chocolate Factory is located in, such as in Pewaukee and even Sheboygan. But I will say the Menominee Falls one, it does a great job for what it is. But the thing is that I would be stuck with this injury, my left hand being wrapped up, for about a month. After the 2-week time limit had passed though, I was able to return to work, but I was also able to get a re-examination with the hand specialist at the same Wauwatosa clinic that I was operated on 2 weeks prior. Basically, by May 20th of 2025, they would examine my condition, analyze my movements, and also how well am I able to feel in the exact areas in which that I was inflicted in. Various parts of me, including a small bit of my thumb, as well as the ringer and middler. These fingers were especially the most affected areas there because they of course got sucked in the most and were essentially what received the most horrible of all the injuries. Several fractures in these 2 fingers alone. And there was even compound fractures, meaning the bone actually pierced through the side and was exposed. Of course, the fingers, the nails, so to speak, they were completely ripped off, so it would take a while for them to regrow properly. But I was, of course, given a removal of the splint and the wrappings there, and I was just given a new set of wrappings to work with for the rest of the time until I was fully recovered. There was also some antibiotics that I had to take along the way as well, plus some gel that would be necessary for preventing any mass infection happening as a result of extreme exposure. I mean, the workplace I had was pretty damn dirty, and on top of all that, they did have to put on a huge amount of iodine solution as a means to completely decontaminate any possible entries for infection. But the thing is that in June, however, a number of other things would happen. I mean, May was already pretty busy, but June was just as much. The whole month was put together by a few more trips. Like, for instance, there was a cabin retreat that I made with my in-laws. One of the first time that I had ever gotten to go on a trip exclusively with my in-laws, because since 2023, my brother Luke has had a marriage, and he and his wife, as of today, are now living in the middle of Illinois, sometime from Chicago. But the thing is that I hadn't gotten much time spent with certain family and friends, especially on the side of my sister-in-law. So of course, I was able to spend some quality time with her two brothers and a few others up in the Nakusa area. Yeah, sometime from Stevens Point. The drive alone was nearly 2 hours, but the cabin itself that we went off into, as well as a nearby lake and some golfing, plus a few other things. We were able to accomplish all of that stuff and even have some pretty good food while we're at it. But then of course, another trip would come along. This time it was Devil's Lake, which is near Baraboo, Wisconsin. A little distance from the Wisconsin Dells as well as Madison, but hey, we at least got to go towards Merrimack and the Wisconsin River, along with that famous ferry system. Now, there's been a ton of photos and videos I've been able to log in on all that stuff there, and there was even a night at the casino, believe it or not, which I managed to earn pretty good amounts of money there. But let's be real here. The real big event that truly ended the month of June, not just my 26th birthday, which also ended up pretty well, would have to be a marriage that came along from an old friend of mine. Yeah, so by June 30th, 2025, a full-on marriage was made between a long friend that I've had for years. And I, of course, was chosen to bear witness, as well as bear the wedding rings. So, this, of course, was, much like with my brother's marriage, a unique event that I was more than glad I participated in. It was a pretty big day that we had during that time, and best of all, it's just the fact that I now get to have some quality time spent, because they would, of course, move in a lot closer to my area. But throughout the rest of the summer, though, it's not exactly as eventful. Although there was talks about the state fair, as well as massive flash floodings that occurred within the first couple of weeks of August 2025. And I haven't talked very much about movies and video games and all that stuff, but I'll get to those in a bit. So, flash flooding and the state fair, of course, all took place, but hey, I got to do all that stuff before the flash floods happened. And the state fair itself was pretty impressive. I'm more than glad that they were able to recuperate from a number of problems that happened. And more often than not, West Dallas being a close outlier to the city of Milwaukee, you never would have expected West Dallas, of all places, to suddenly recover from a number of problems that happened over there. I mean, it was already bad enough that 10 years ago, Milwaukee had a ton of problems, especially within the political system. And then, of course, you had all the people out there whom were incredibly dysfunctional, very wrong, had no licenses to drive or even operate heavy machinery, and a number of different issues from the streets to the businesses that are all over the city. But nowadays, we're at least grateful that change has come around and some new systemic things have been brought around. I'm also hoping for a number of other things to happen within Milwaukee, but nonetheless, we're at least happy to see some change happen here. But I will say that some of the other big highlights here is the fact that in fall of 2025, especially September and October, were also pretty big just as well. In September, for instance, there was another trip to the Illinois Railway Museum, as I had already made another trip the May before in 2024. So basically, it was about 17 months prior. And in October, there was, of course, a graduation party I had with another long-term friend who is unfortunately not married, unlike another one that I've talked about before. But at the same time that there was also the celebration of life for his deceased grandmother, there was, of course, the graduation he had from college, and holy crap, he was like almost 7 feet tall now. And his brother is almost the same height as me, and he's 13, by the way. What is going on with people's heights? Well, anyways, though, all that stuff came around, and even a couple of death threats from someone at that very same party. Could be from being drunk or from having thyroid problems, which is something that I actually talked with her about. But let's be honest. Does she really need to go to jail with blood on her hands when I haven't even done nothing to her? I don't think so. But anyways, though, later on in the month of October, we actually made another trip to the likes of Iowa. Especially where some highlights like Boone, which of course is the famous place for more railroading. So that's 4 places I went to in regards to railroading. And in terms of rail fanning stuff itself, a lot of photos and videos, of course, have taken place, especially with the likes of the East Troy area, as well as the National Railroad Museum near Green Bay, which I'd say was the best one that I did so far. Apart from the Illinois Railroad Museum, and then of course there was the Boone Scenic Valley Railroad, or the Boone Train Museum. I will say East Troy was also really good just as well. But between all 4 of these locations, it's hard to really choose which was the best experience. I mean, I spent a good 2.5 hours over at the Green Bay National Railroad Museum. And being able to see a GG1, a big boy, the A3 Pacific, who would have thought that an English Mallard engine would be over at a United States-based railroad museum? On top of that, there was also equipment from Great Northern, Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range, including mallet number 506, which at the time was undergoing some work, as it was disconnected from its tender, plus a number of other things just as well. And then of course, up until now, the last few months and several weeks worth were some pretty busy times, especially in my workplace and otherwise, on account of the holidays. A good amount of savings I was able to accumulate also because of the holidays. And then of course, well, little problems. If you remember from my last recap video, which was about 2024, I've mentioned that I did end up losing my last car. In November 2024, I had a Nissan Juke, which at that time I had owned for more than 2 years, having bought it used at a Bergstrom dealership in Oshkosh. But that car unfortunately ended up suffering a massive engine failure, and we had to write it off, sell it for scrap, over at the Caledonia Auto Center. But then of course, having to wait nearly 2 months just to get a hold of my current vehicle, which is a Mazda CX-5, I'd say it was at least worth it, because this is so much better in comparison. The CX-5 just does so much better in life. I mean, suspension is incredible. Acceleration and deceleration both work in their own unique ways. It's got some original parts, believe it or not, despite being 5 years old. And on top of all that, I feel like that the stock engine work, with it being an inline 6 with some superchargers, and I was even able to get a fresh new air filter into the system. So that means that I'm pushing at a good 299 horsepower. So compared to the Nissan Juke, which did have a lot more tuning take place and it produced a lot more horsepower, the CX-5 that I got right now actually does a really good job on the road, and it's also pretty tough for what it is. I mean, I was able to do some drifts on the ice not too long ago, and I was even able to get some good old speed running up the hill. And I can't say that I will ever do any more land speed record breaking with a vehicle like this. I can go over 185 miles per hour at maximum. I can't really see myself doing that, but I'm sure there's at least one place where we can go to where we can truly exceed speed limits. And there's probably none at all in some places. I guess I just have yet to find out what they are. But apart from losing a wheel, which was thankfully very easy to replace, and then of course being able to pay off a number of outstanding bills that I've had quite easily because of the holidays again, I'd say that really chalks up to a number of things about 2025 that I feel like, despite some of the bads coming in, like my hand injury and losing a wheel of my newer vehicle, and a couple of other things, they're both pretty minor for the most part, so not entirely worth talking about here. I feel like that the real culmination that makes 2025 quite a hell of a year, apart from the movies I've seen, apart from the video games that I've seen, with some honorable mentions of movies, for instance, being Predator Badlands, Tron Ares, Final Destination Bloodlines, Dogman, and the more recent Anaconda. And we definitely can't forget the bad guys too. I mean, just like the first film, I gave it a perfect 10.1 out of 10. Enough said. But as for video games, First Impressions was something I actually took a break from for a majority of 2025, but notable entries I made into the series this year will include Monster Hunter Wilds, 2 Point Museum, Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater, and Borderlands 4. So I'd say I've had a good amount of things to work with in those regards. But really, T-Rex. This is a series I've had since this April. And well, after 8 months, I am more than happy to say that T-Rex may solely be the reason why this channel has grown exponentially. I mean, I got over 117,000 subscribers as a result of this series alone. And the analytics on my channel do show that I get an average viewership of over 5,000 views per hour. Yeah, so this typically is in regards to one single video here. So the thing is that these videos have a lot of rewatch value and a lot of viewership and subscriber counts brought on because of their existence. So overall, 2025, it certainly has overshadowed 2024 because a number of ups and downs occurred in that year as well, but some of the downs almost completely overtook the ups. From a massive case of thyroiditis, and then of course having to lose 2 cars in the process because I also used a loaner, which I ended up getting wrecked thanks to a deer. So we don't need to go into that kind of detail as much for the sake of the community guidelines and all that. All these people out here want to talk crap about YouTube, but let me remind you here. Some things just aren't worth looking into or knowing about. There was also a piece of wisdom I was told, which, quote unquote, trying to make sense of something won't always end well for you. And so, I feel like I've not only strengthened myself mentally and physically, but through many other aspects as well. There truly has not been as much of an improvement in most years, but this one sure has done so much for me. I mean, despite a number of things that happened, like having to relocate Planet Fitness locations as they did so in my area a little while ago, to having my hand get injured, I mean, sure, there's going to be some downs, but there's always going to be ups in every single year. And for 2026, there's going to be a lot of plans just as well. A lot of trips will be put together just the same as what we had here in 2025. And on top of all that, there's a whole host of GWK First Impressions, T-Rex, and other such related content that I have planned all throughout the year. So you'll definitely want to stay around because 2026, I can imagine that the channel is going to grow even bigger. Let's see if we can push to 500,000 subscribers by the end of 2026. But other than that, my final scoring for 2025 is going to be a pretty good 8.9 out of 10.1. Granted, it's not exactly as near perfect as what 2023 had, but it gets pretty close, marginally speaking. But for the most part, 2023 is still the victor here. Ups and downs are to be expected for next year as well, but having said all that I've said today, and nearly 25 minutes worth of my time, thank you guys for watching on Kaiju Force Neo. And I will see you guys tomorrow, January 1st, 2026.